Oh, look, it's fantastic to have two airlines, and we do need that competitive tension in the market. And also, must recognise that Virgin employ a lot of Australians. However, there's a context to my concerns, and that is that, as you suggested, the company is majority foreign-owned. 90% of its shares are shared across 5 foreign investors. And from 13-14 through to 17-18, the company took revenues of around $23.4 billion, and they paid zero corporate tax. One of those companies that holds a 10% stake is domiciled in the British Virgin Islands, a known tax haven. So my view on this is that we should, rather than give a loan to the company, we should take an equity stake. There are downsides, similar downsides for a loan and an equity stake, but significant upsides for an equity stake, and that would include us being able to put someone on the board, the government having a representative on the board, the government being able to set up frameworks where the company succeeds and does pay tax. And as the market restores back to normal, the taxpayer would likely make a profit out of this.
Aren't you effectively moving to nationalise an airline against Qantas, which has been the national airline?
No, taking an equity stake is not the same thing as owning a company outright. And indeed, I know that Qantas are interested in some assistance from government, and a similar sort of offer would or could be made to Qantas. Once again, they might have to accept that they would have an Australian government nominee on the board and deal with those sorts of elements of any package. But the Australian government should not simply be handing out money to companies left, right and centre. We do need to have a multifaceted approach. In some cases, we will need to support Australian companies through grants, but particularly in a circumstance where we've got heavily dominated foreign ownership of a company, we really do need to be careful about how we spend taxpayers' money.
When it comes to foreign ownership, the government did move to have the review board now review every single instance of foreign ownership. They've dialed that oversight down to $0. So every instance of a foreign interest trying to buy anything in Australia will be scrutinised now by the government. Do you think that there needs to be a longer term look at this kind of review process as Australia looks to rebuild after coronavirus?
Look, I think the Treasurer has done the right thing by reducing the thresholds to zero. We are in a situation where there's potential for predatory behaviour by foreign entities taking over Australian companies in distress. But we do need to change the foreign investment review framework. We need to define what the national interest test is. That's something that they do in New Zealand. And we also need to have an arrangement in place, again, as they do in New Zealand, that when the FIRB, the Foreign Investment Review Board, make decisions, that those decisions are public and we can see exactly why the decision was made and any conditions that are placed on a company. We have a situation right now where, unlike New Zealand, Australians are not allowed to see the basis of any decisions in relation to foreign investment. We need changes.
The government's also signalled that they are going to forge on with things like the income tax cuts that have been legislated, as well as the Submarine program. Do you think that's wise?
Look, I think we have to continue to support our economy. The Submarine project is an important program. However, I'm on the record as saying I think the risk profile is very high. And another thing we absolutely have to do, and more so as a result of coronavirus, is we have to enforce the local content, the Australian industry participation in programs like the Future Submarine program. Interestingly, in terms of trade agreements, national security defence projects are carved out of any requirements in respect of trade agreements. We should be maximising Australian content and Australian industry involvement in all of our defence projects, and sadly we are not doing that right now, and that also has to change post-coronavirus.
And just finally, on that post-coronavirus world, do you think there should be a minister appointed dedicated to the rebuild of the Australian economy?
Look, the good news is that we are seeing the curve start to flatten, but there's no end in sight. We do not know when this will be over, and there will be a number of millions of jobs that don't return after this pandemic. We need to really have a plan in place, and we need to start that planning now, and we need to have someone who has authority and respect within the government leading that charge. It's a most critical function, and it can't just be left to a sort of an ad hoc put together plan.